Hi, good to see you, Dr. Tharoor.
Very good to see you guys. That's terrific. And I can see comments scrolling in right through, and almost 5,000 people watching. That's wonderful.
5,000
Wonderful.
people, 5,000
Oh,
people watching, and all thanks to you. They have to bear with me as well. But it's a
delighted,
pleasure,
delighted. What
pleasure
are
to be
these
able to
puffs
do
of
this.
what are these puffs of smoke coming up on the right screen? Like we have a pope or something?
I think that's all the hearts that you're getting from all your young fans.
Oh, great.
But but you don't need any introduction. But I need to do this at the outset of every conversation. So I try to come up with something nice and new every time we speak. And this time, let me introduce this man. His writerly life is almost twice my lifespan. An erudite scholar who uses the spoken word to school the British and the BJP about the Hindu way of life. Jumping into the maelstrom of Indian politics, the musings of this cricket tragic have often challenged conventional wisdom. Howbeit, what I'm happiest to know is that the cat is out of the bag with the section selected fiction and poetry. We usually have a performance, Dr. Tharoor, that intersperses speeches, but it seems that we don't need it anymore, given the fact that now we know that there is a mellifluous singer-composer in you. Every fragment of an autobiography has so much to offer young flowers who are beginning to bloom, and you cannot be serious around him. You must seriously pay attention to every word he says. In our unruly world comes someone who, in my humble opinion, is not in the company of giants, but probably the giants that the nation needs. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, both on Instagram and all the other platforms that you're watching this on, please put your virtual hands together for the essential Shashi Tharoor. Dr. Tharoor, welcome home. Welcome to your young people's home, which is I.I.M.U.N. And thank you for doing this.
Delighted to be with the young. They're my favorite people. You're my favorite people, all of you. Great.
And I hope I did justice to all the chapters in your book. I tried to cover all of them.
I was very impressed with that. I must say, you ran through a summary of 75 essays in one brilliant introduction. Thank you, Rishabh.
No, but Dr. Tharoor, you've written 22 books now. Correct me if I'm wrong. But there are 22 books, and
This is the 23rd. This one before us. Yeah.
And people used to ask me, saying, "Where do I start from?" And now there is a reference point. Finally, there is Pride, Prejudice, and Punditry that people can actually start, reading this book and then choose the books that you have written. But tell me, why did you think of writing this book per se? Now that you've got 22 books, was it just as a reference point for young people or for people at large that you thought of writing this book?
Well, it came out of a conversation with my publisher, David Davidar of I.I.M.U.N. David is actually somebody who's published me from the Great Indian Novel when he was at Penguin, Viking Penguin. And so he's been a strongly sort of aware of my writing throughout my writing career. And he said, listen, we ought to put together something that stands as a kind of reference volume. And at the same time, it happens to be the 10th anniversary of the publishing house he founded, namely Aleph. So he wanted a special book for his 10th anniversary. And the two, I've been in the writing business, as it were, since my childhood. But my first book came out exactly 40 years ago, Reasons of State. So 40 years of books, 10 years of Aleph, boom, there we go.
40 years of books and 10 years of Aleph, and that's how you get 23 books. But let me ask you the most important question to start this conversation, because the organization believes in spreading the idea of India. And that's the central theme of what the organization stands for. Now, you've written something very interesting about Sonia Gandhi. You talk about her and you justify her Indianness in your book. So, but in the prism of identity, which is another chapter, you speak about the different notions of a nation and the fact that a nation is only conceptualized in many ways to just divide people. Then why not, like you've written in your book, in Tagore's words, call her a humanitarian internationalist? According to you, who is an Indian, and how is Sonia Gandhi also an Indian? Because a lot of people want to understand that as well.
Okay, so she's an Indian because she chose to be one, and I think anyone can. I mean, one of the interesting things about it, and you've familiar with my book, as we talked about at the Battle of Belonging last year, is that there are two essentially different notions of national identity, nationalism as well. One is those based on immutable factors from birth, like your race, your religion, your ethnicity, your mother tongue, and so on, which you can't really help, you're born into it. And the other is what we call civic nationalism, which is a nationalism of constitutions and institutions, where anyone can sort of be a voluntary subscriber to that idea of nationhood. So that's why a country like America has people of every conceivable ethnicity, national origin, religion, etc., who are proud to call themselves American. And it was that notion that we had in India as well. I often I've compared this in speeches in America, where they have this notion of America as a melting pot. I would say in India, we're not a melting pot, we're a thali. We're a collection of different dishes in different bowls. They're all on one platter. Because they're in different bowls and they taste different, they don't necessarily flow into each other, but they combine together on your palate to give you a satisfying repast. And that is the idea of Indianness, where people have different identities and yet they all jointly subscribe to an idea of Indianness. So someone like Sonia Gandhi is as entitled to be an authentic Indian as a Punjabi peasant farmer, a Tamil bureaucrat, if you like, a Malayali coffeehouse intellectual, a Bengali revolutionary. I mean, all these different kinds of backgrounds. And then, of course, you have differences of caste, you have differences of appearance, of food habits, of culture. But all of those don't matter because you subscribe jointly to the idea of India enshrined in the Constitution. And that's the way in which Sonia Gandhi, in my view, is as Indian as any one of us.
Is as Indian as the Chaiwala who's also become the Prime Minister.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. Sir, if I may, you served internationally and then also in the country. And huge admirer of your work when it comes to international relations. But I often get confused personally as well. Sometimes you say that the nation is more important than the globe, and some of your work shows us the globe is more important than the nation. According to you, what comes first, India or international?
You know, Kofi Annan, my old boss at the United Nations, once told me rather memorably, where you stand depends on where you sit. So I have to say that when I was at the UN, when I used the word we, I meant the UN, I meant the world as a whole, and a lot of what I said and wrote was about the interests of our common humanity. When I came back to India and became a politician, and I was accountable to an electorate, not just Indians in general, but the 2 million residents of Thiruvananthapuram constituency in particular, naturally, my we began to relate to a narrower set of people. But that doesn't mean that you can't hold these two ideas in your head at the same time, Rishabh. When I'm speaking in Thiruvananthapuram, it's about local issues. When I speak in Parliament, it's usually about national issues. Though I was also chairman of our External Affairs Committee and spoke about international issues. When I was at the UN, I spoke about the globe. But why should these things be incompatible? Why shouldn't foreign policy matter to a fisherwoman in my constituency whose diesel prices are affected by international oil prices, as well as by Mr. Modi's taxes, but that's another matter. Why shouldn't a disease which can start off in China but invade her village in Kerala be of concern to her? Of course they should be. And therefore, when we speak of our common humanity, it's not an abstraction. These are real things that come across and actually affect us here where we live. And that's why the globe, the nation, and the locality are all intimately interconnected.
Understood. So, which is, and very, very deftly, you've avoided answering the question immediately. You've steered away from answering the question just like how a diplomat would. But sir, you spoke about the United Nations, you spoke about Kofi Annan, and in this book also you mentioned about the UN and you speak about various aspects of the United Nations and your time at the UN. But as I've discovered over a period of time from my myopic understanding of the UN, don't you think, sir, that the UN has failed often in comparison to succeeding? Whether it be 85% of historic Palestine now becoming a part of Israel, whether it be the Uyghur Muslim issue in China, whether it be Afghanistan, whether it be 22% yet being funded by one country. don't you think the United Nations is now becoming more and more unilateral nonsense in comparison to Uniting Nations? Given the fact that they've not been able to reform despite reforms having been advocated by your old boss, Kofi Annan.
Yes, but the thing is, my dear Rishabh, is that you are presuming that the UN has the capacity to do all of the things that you feel it hasn't done. The truth is, the UN is a collection of member states who have retained sovereign power themselves. No government has yielded to the United Nations the right to interfere in its internal affairs without its consent. Here's in China, unless China wants it to come and be involved. Just as it can't be involved in Kashmir because the Indian government will not let it be involved in that sense. I mean, it has a presence, but it's not a presence anyone takes very seriously. The UN is an organization that represents the collective will of governments and therefore can do what the governments are prepared to agree that it can do. So where you have the political will to give the UN a mandate, a realistic mandate, give it resources to fulfill that mandate, whether it's troops, whether it's money, whether it's other kinds of clout, then the UN will work, and it's worked extremely well, which is why it's won 2 or 3 Nobel Prizes. But when you look at the UN in terms of objectives that governments do not want it to fulfill, then you're being unfair to the UN, right? You're blaming the UN for doing things it hasn't been structured to do. Dag Hammarskjöld, the UN Secretary General, who in many ways, aside from Kofi Annan, would be the man I would admire the most. I never knew him, and I knew Kofi very well. Dag Hammarskjöld said in the 1950s, when confronted with a question like yours, he said the UN was not designed to take mankind to paradise. It was designed to save humanity from hell. So the best it can do very often is to prevent things from getting worse. By providing a platform where countries that disagree can come together and talk to each other, by providing a mechanism available for countries to use if and when they want to use it, but it's not going to be, I'm afraid, some sort of perfect magic wave-wanding organization that can fix every problem in the world, because the world has not actually supported a world government. There is no world government, and therefore there is not yet a UN that can solve all the problems that you wanted to solve.
But sir, would it be better than to have a structure, a formal structure like the Concert of Europe, or things like that, a multilateral organization that can actually do something in comparison? I completely understand that the UN has tried to do many things within the fold that, within the powers that they have. But then when you have 293 vetoes that are being cast, when you have issues that are being deliberated upon without member countries who that issue is for, then the very purpose of the United Nations, which is, in your words, to save hell from humanity, which you just
humanity from hell, yeah.
Humanity from hell, yes. The idea that how can we actually get there if there are so many issues in the UN per se? Don't you think a better multilateral organization or a more reformed United Nations is the need of the hour?
It may well be. I think all of us have ideal pictures in our minds, but will governments agree to them? When it's so difficult at the moment for even a simple thing like UN Security Council reform to be accomplished after 25 years of trying to lobby for it, how on earth are you going to have the invention of a new organization that is more ambitious than this one? Take practical examples. Can you imagine the US or China being willing to yield power in such an organization? Can you imagine either of them agreeing to a situation where the other might be able to use the UN or UN mechanisms or UN personnel to tell a country like China or the US what to do? So you have to understand there are realistic limits. This is very much an organization of member states. The UN, paradoxically, is both a stage and an act. It's a stage on which the member states actually play their parts, write their own scripts. It's an actor in the sense that once the member states have agreed on a script, they can give it to the Secretary General and his agencies and his peacekeeping operations and so on. Tell them you go out and execute it. But if the member states can't agree on the script, the actor doesn't have lines to read.
Fair. In your assessment of what you said, that if member states do not agree on a script, then there's very little that one can do. And unfortunately, member states do not agree to many things, and sometimes people in parliament also do not agree to many things, and therefore we have an impasse in parliament. Taking you to the next area of your life, and so also in many ways your book. Um, Politics is something that a lot of young people from the organization have eventually joined. And one of the things that they complain is that the intellectuals or so-called people who are well-read, well-qualified, well-meaning, well-intentioned are not able to do much when it comes to active politics, because at the end of the day, they need to follow party lines. As someone who has many a time gone outside the spectrum of the existing party high command line that has been given and many spokespersons follow, you've actually spoken your voice, and that's essentially costed you on many occasions. Many young people, many young people are therefore contemplating saying, why join politics? Because at the end of the day, the best you can do is, which is phenomenal, is pass a few bills in parliament. But the worst that happens is that the vast majority of the reasons why you entered politics, and which is what we're seeing on a day-to-day basis, something that you cannot achieve because you're impaired by a party high command or by few people in Delhi or Nagpur to do their bidding.
So let me just say that joining politics, Rishabh,
Right.
is still worth doing for those who are so minded. I recognize that very many people are not so minded, but it's worth doing only because it seems to me, at any rate, that there is no better or more effective way of making a difference in a democracy than using the instruments of our democracy, which we can only access through the political space. So whether it's a city council or a village panchayat, whether it's a national parliament, ultimately the political space gives you the means of access to have your voice heard and your ideas listened to in any of these forums. That's why politics is important. Now, of course, there are other ways you can be heard. You can write op-eds in newspapers. You can deliver speeches. You can have your own YouTube or Instagram channel. That's fine. I mean, these are all ways you can also reach people. And if all we were able to do in politics was to reach people through our words and ideas, I would agree with you. Politics is by no means the only platform in which we can do that. But what politics gives you is the possibility of doing more than that by actually having access to power. And that makes a big difference because obviously in our country, a lot of decisions are taken by governments, are taken by political leaders that because you're in politics, you are able to influence, perhaps be a part of, or perhaps even be a political leader yourself. So if these are things that matter to you, then you should get in. For me, for example, some of the issues I care about at the national and international level, particularly foreign policy issues, obviously have very limited ability to influence from the opposition. You have to be in government to make foreign policy. Mind you, when I was chairman of the External Affairs Committee of Parliament, I did have a ringside seat in many of the issues, was able to speak very closely with the foreign secretary and the foreign minister, and was able thereby to have some input as well as to learn more about the thinking of our country on key foreign policy issues. Today, I'm not in that position, so I can't say that. But this interests me, and I believe that I have ideas to contribute and questions to ask and inputs to gain. And therefore, for me, being able to do that as a politician, not merely, let's say, a columnist, if I were to call our foreign minister, he takes my call. Would he take it if I was merely a columnist or a public speaker or an author? Maybe not as often. So there are some advantages of being in the space, in the arena, as the famous line of Theodore Roosevelt's about it, that the critic can say what he likes from the outside, but it's the person who's actually got the dust and the sweat of the arena who deserves our respect. And I think that's ultimately the spirit in which I'm there in politics.
So one needs to get their hands dirty if one wants to bring about change. That is the message that I'm getting from you, and that's your message probably for a lot of young people.
But with hands dirty sounds a bit dramatic. Feet wet might be a little more. But yeah, that's the concept anyway. Be in there yourself, right? If it interests you.
Well, I'm from Bombay, so a little bit of Bollywood is in everything that we say and do. But talking about Bollywood and talking about Bombay, there was a Bombay boy who went to a person who lives in Bombay who went to the United States of America and created a lot of drama and a lot of reactions across. He gave statements which spoke about India very differently from what many in India would like to project and portray. My question is this: as a person who's gone internationally, and probably in my humble opinion is, and you saw that in the chat section, Tharoor for PM, but in my humble opinion, is one of the finest statesmen across the country and an international figure who everybody respects when you represent India. Don't you think when you represent the country at that juncture and you're speaking internationally, is one thing to criticize the government, which is completely fair, but to go outside India and to basically talk about things that are not so positive about the country, doesn't that show in many a way that a person such as that should not, and I understand the anti-national narrative and so on and so forth, but somebody who's respected like Veer should not have done something like.
You know, Rishabh, it's a very difficult question to answer that simply. I actually think Veer was not there to attack India. He was there to describe and talk about India, and to an audience that seemed to be largely full of Indians. Secondly, and he doesn't need me to defend him, but I'm just saying, secondly, what an Indian speaking frankly abroad reflects in many ways is our democracy at work. You know, when you are speaking critically of your own government, you are not being anti-national or being unpatriotic. In fact, there's probably no higher form of patriotism than saying that I'll support my government when it does the right thing for my nation, and I will criticize it when it does not. I think that's a very patriotic stand to take. My country, right or wrong, is one kind of style of nationalism and patriotism that our present government likes to talk about. Whereas the argument that says my country, applaud it when it's right and criticize it when it's wrong, is I think far more genuinely patriotic, because no one wants to actually go around saying that all the wrong things that are being done in the name of the country should uncritically be defended. Now, there are fundamental issues of national interest and there are issues of political difference, and you can draw a distinction. I, as an opposition MP, went with the Lok Sabha Speaker to a parliamentary conference where we engaged in debate with the Pakistani delegation. It was an inter-parliamentary conference. And I spoke with passion, and I said, frankly, as an opposition MP, if I have battles to fight at home, I'll fight them myself. I don't need you, Pakistanis, to tell my government what's wrong with it. You know, and that, to my mind, is, for me, a question that is undebatable. I don't think you ever trash a country where national interests are involved. But if I, as an opposition MP, am asked about whether this government is perfect at freedom of expression issues, whether it's perfect in its demonetization policy, whether they did the right thing with the farm laws or whatever, as a thinking, reflective Indian and as an opposition MP, I have the right to express my disagreements with the government's actions, even if I happen to be abroad. And there is really no contradiction in this. You know, I will never allow people to elide the difference between saying standing up for India on international platforms when it's the collective interest of India, and standing up for individual government policies and actions, or even failures of our own society that I disapprove of. I mean, why would I go abroad and defend, say, dowry deaths? You know, I would be ashamed that in my society there are women being burned to death in their kitchens because they didn't bring enough dowry with them. I will condemn it. No one can go around saying I'm being anti-national. So is the woman who died somehow not part of the nation? So let's think very sensibly about understanding that not all criticism of India abroad is illegitimate.
Fair. That's your perspective on the issue, and I respect what you just mentioned. You also mentioned that one should not speak when one speaks negatively about the country abroad, or when one is criticizing the country abroad, one is criticizing, say, for example, certain policies of the government and not the country as a whole. Then again, one could see certain parts of his speech in a very different light. But then again, that's a subject matter which one would not want to touch upon.
See, if I were the ambassador of India, I'd point to that speech and tell people, this is Indian democracy at work. See, he's saying all of these things, and he's free to do so. We'll defend his right to do so. That's our democracy. And we'll get applauded for that, in my view.
which is very different from what a lot of people in the ruling dispensation would like to think about this. And talking about the ruling dispensation, I'm talking about the differences between the BJP and the Indian National Congress. I know you are a cricket aficionado and you like cricket,
Yes.
and therefore utilize a cricketing analogy, much like how Test cricket was replaced by T20. Lots of people are saying that the Congress is now being replaced by the Bharatiya Janata Party. And unlike the ICC, who introduced the World Test Championship, in the case of the Congress Party, there seems to be very little that the High Command seems to be doing in order to revamp the political party. To young people who are necessarily between the age bracket of 14 to 30, who are watching this currently, what is the fundamental difference between the BJP and the Congress? And so also, why is the Congress Party losing election after election?
The fundamental difference between the BJP and the Congress is one of ideology and of conviction, of values. I mean, the Congress party comes, of course, from the days of the nationalist movement, and in many ways helped shape the idea of India that an organization like I.I.M.U.N stands for in defense, an idea of India that is first and foremost inclusive, that says whatever your religion is, your caste is, your region in the country is, your language, your mother tongue is, your color of skin is, whatever, that you belong, you have the same rights as everybody else. That idea is core to the Congress. Whereas the BJP's ideology is officially anchored in the notion of Hindutva, which is a far more monolithic idea, and which appears to privilege the adherents of one faith, of all the faiths in our country, the majority faith in our country, above others, and reduces others to second-class citizenship. To my mind, that is the fundamental cleavage. Now, beyond that, there are policy issues and differences. You know, I've written about this at such length, I don't know where to start and where to stop, but I can say, for example, that where they would emphasize uniformity, we would emphasize unity. Where we would talk about consensus, they would talk about conformity. Where we would talk about diversity, they would prefer to stress sameness, and so on and so forth. Even the whole cliche of unity in diversity, they would turn around and say diversity in unity. In other words, for them, the unity is core. The parallel of the thali that I mentioned earlier in our conversation, for them would be rather a bowl of khichdi. You may have a sort of piece of gajar sticking out or a lump of aloo, but essentially it's one large saffron mix that they believe needs to be enshrined and celebrated as a symbol of India rather than the thali symbol that I talk about. So these are the differences which fundamentally are differences of orientation and of conviction. Now, why does the Congress keep losing? I mean, I think the simplest answer very often is that the other guys seem to be better at organizing themselves for elections. But there are various other factors, and there's really no time to delve into them. There are certainly issues relating to the way in which the previous UPA government was perceived. There are issues relating to party organization. There are issues involving financial resources. I mean, which frankly, the BJP in every constituency, I've seen them at work, they outspend all their rivals put together. They have the money, and that does help get the message across more effectively. Right. There's this tremendous use of social media, which all of you are very aware of, because I'm sure that all the 4,500 people still left in this chat at some point or the other been the recipient of a WhatsApp piece of BJP propaganda, because they're ubiquitous. I get them too. So the fact is that all of these things can come together, and we can talk about how that organizational effectiveness could be challenged. But right now, I don't deny the fact that, as you put it, they are doing better than we are in elections.
But there's also the other side, and I won't get into conversation on that. But there's also the other side that after 34 years, finally we have a new education policy. It's taken almost 65 years in order to complete the Sardar Sarovar Dam. It's been about 17 years, and then finally we came out with the GST, from 91,000 kilometers of roads to now 150,000 kilometers of road. So from 6.86 crore people filing IT returns to now so very many more. So the fact that the BJP is also doing things on ground, but that's a subject for another day. Let me take you to let me take you to something again that you've written in your book, and I was so very happy to read that, because there's very little writing when it comes to your early life, when it comes to your teenage life. Your father was very affable and was very anxious to please everyone, but your mother was the one who seemed to be pushing you to the limits. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but that is what it comes across as. And
Yeah, I mean, they both had ambitions and aspirations for me, no doubt about it. But my mother was the one who, in many ways, was never content with anything that I accomplished. She kept wanting me to do better, and I think that in some ways, looking back, she had more of an effect, perhaps, on my conduct than I had entirely admitted to myself.
so, but let me ask you this question: what was, because there's so many teenagers who are watching this, and you're seeing the numbers are not dropping because they're really liking the conversation, especially what you're saying. What is the day in the life of a teenage Shashi Tharoor at 16, 17, and 18? What was a normal day in your life like?
Oh well, 16 was when I got the results of my school leaving exams. I finished school at 16 and went into college. So if I were to look at the highlights of my 16th year, it would be getting ragged at St. Stephen's College, getting used to the to being on my own for the first time since my childhood. I mean, I had spent one brief and disastrous year in boarding school at the age of 5, so we can't really count that. But just learning to stand on my own feet, form my own friendships and relationships, all of that was a very crucial thing at the age of 16. College became a place where I started spreading my wings, discovering various multiple opportunities to test out my talents. So I was debating, I was in speech contests, I founded the quiz club at college when I was 17 or 17, 18, which is now the oldest quiz club in any campus in India, but now every campus has a quiz club. St. Stephen's was the first. I had revived the Woodhouse Society, and we had humorous events on campus, including a practical joke week, of which once I was the victim. We had all sorts of activities, and I was in, and I finally, when I was 18, I ran for president of St. Stephen's College Union, and I won handsomely, I'm pleased to say. I think one of the slogans that sticks in the mind from those days is Shashi Tharoor jeetega zarur. So we did. All of which I think was absolutely remarkable, and I'm very, very pleased with looking back on those years at the kind of human being that emerged from that crucible of a college where there was tremendous creativity, ideas bouncing off all the time, people expressing jokes, puns, humor, lively campus magazines, lively campus environment. There wasn't a dull moment. This is a pre-social media era. No one was going around with their faces buried in mobile phones, or for that matter, even computers and laptops. So if you wanted to read, you read books. If you wanted to chat, you roped up friends and went to a coffee house. And if you wanted to activities to keep you involved in, my gosh, there was so much. The college had so many societies, student societies, that we could all be members of. So it really did give me a terrific amount of experience, exposure, and helped shape the person I eventually became. I think those were the formative years. 16 to 19 would be the key years, I think, that made me the adult to follow.
So from being ragged at 16 to becoming president of the student union at 18. And I'm so glad you shared some insights on that. And another very interesting chapter that I found was about poetry, about fiction, because I think that was in your earlier works, and I'm very happy that I got a chance to actually go through that. You've also, and as somebody that I've grown to know, I've seen and I've discussed this, that it's pained you many a time, because sometimes showmen who masquerade as journalists, to quote unquote you, have really fight on many occasions, especially when it came to, if I may, your late wife. And you've penned a beautiful piece for her in the book, and you've also shared some collections of, poetry that you have penned over the years. Any one particular piece that was your favorite, or a few lines that you'd like to narrate to people at large?
I don't know, it may take too long to read the poem to Sunanda, which of course is one that a couple of people have been rather taken by. It was written very soon after she passed away, within a few weeks, while her departure was still very fresh and very painful. And looking back on it now, I'm able to read it aloud without, feeling completely devastated. But at the same time, it captures fairly well what I felt for, and I'd recommend that people read it. There's a shorter poem I can read, since many of you are going through, I imagine, young
Well,
relationships. Perhaps a shorter poem called "I Do Not Love You." Shall I read that? It's just a few lines.
please, if you could. And there are other requests coming in, but I'll leave that for a little later as probably the last question. I think.
Okay, well, I have to say that you hadn't warned me you were going to do this, so it'll take me a second to look up the right page. Where are we now?
No, I couldn't help but stop myself in getting you to recite a poem, because the literary genius that you are when it comes to writing things about international issues, domestic policies, etc., is great. But when it came to poetry, that was a pleasant surprise, and which is why I thought, let me get you to probably read a few lines.
Okay, here's a short poem called "I Do Not Love You." It's with apologies to Pablo Neruda, who wrote a poem with the same title, but somewhat different. I do not love you as the jeweler loves the glitter of gold, or the designer the elegance of the sari fold. I do not love you as the politician loves a vote, or the water loves the caress of the gliding boat. I do not love you as the flame adores the wick it devours, or as the ticking clock consumes the passing hours. No, I love you. The glowing soul. So it's a short one, which I hope makes the point that love isn't all about taking out of the person or possessing the person or deriving certain benefits from the person. Love is something entirely intimate and private between two people. That's what that's about. And then I have a poem I wrote for my sons one New Year some years ago, which I decided to share with the world, because I think most parents feel this way about their sons or daughters or both. And in fact, this could be about daughters as well, but I only have sons, so there you are. I now have daughters-in-law, but they didn't exist when I wrote this. This year, my sons, I wish you the joy of hopes and dreams and the fulfillment of achieving some of those dreams. This year, my sons, I wish you the intimate knowledge of what it means to love and be loved, as if there is nothing more important in the world. This year, my sons, I wish you the strength of your convictions, the passion to defend them, and the wisdom to accept when you may be wrong. This year, my sons, I wish you laughter in your lives, music around you, and the pleasure of silence when you crave it. This year, my sons, I wish you understanding of people who may have hurt you, misunderstood you, or been unjust to you, because the world must be accepted as it is and understood rather than resented. This year, my sons, I wish you health and strength and virtue, all three together, because they complement each other and because one without the other two is worthless. This year, my sons, I wish you intensity, never indifference, knowledge, never ignorance, energy, never lassitude, desire, never hatred. This year, my sons, I wish you acceptance, because some pain is inevitable in life, and accepting and dealing with it is part of what will make you men worthy of respect. This year, my sons, I wish you courage to face whatever misfortunes and injustices might come your way, and I wish you determination to fight for the right and resist the wrong. This year, my sons, and every year, I wish you to be happy, and for that, above all, I wish you to be yourselves, for no one can be a better you than you yourself. Happy New Year. So there we are.
Was lovely.
That's for all of you, all of you in the audience.
All of the 4,500 that are yet glued on to this, and at the risk of taking the last 2 minutes and asking the final question, there were a lot of requests of you singing. Where when you were reciting these poems, a lot of them said, "Please, can you sing for us?" I said, "I'm not."
I think let's leave that for now. But I think this will be a this will have to be This will, I think, have to be a conversation rather than an antakshari. But we'll do that some other time.
We'll save that for a physical conference at the organization where you come in and you can sing instead of speak. And I think that'd be a sight that'll be to behold, where Shan and A.R. Rahman can actually witness you sing. But let me ask you the final question, because we always end it like this. We always end it the Bollywood style from Bombay, where we ask you a set of questions, and the first word that comes to your mind, the first word when I say the following words, when I say Jawaharlal Nehru, what's the first thing that comes to your mind, sir?
Founder. I mean, he's somebody who really established the foundations of what we know as India today.
Cricket.
Passion. I love the sport.
Food. When I say the word food,
temptation. Temptation. One often actually indulges too much, and I'm afraid it's becoming increasingly visible as metabolism slows down with age. So yeah, food equals temptation.
We're seeing those Instagram posts of you working out, so I'm sure you are. But then again, music. When I say music, what's the first thought that comes to mind?
Diversion. I mean, I must say that everything in life, to my mind, has music. Words have music. Conversation has music. Relationships have music. An environment has music. But music, literally as music, is, to my mind, a diversion. You can listen to it, but usually I find it very difficult anyway to do some other work while listening to music, because the music demands attention by itself. So just something that diverts you from the mood, from the situation, from the experience you're having,
and the last one, when I say young people and I.I.M.U.N, what's the first thought that comes to your mind?
Impressive. I have been so impressed with what I.I.M.U.N has become since I first met you, and as a student, I think, what was it, 8-9 years ago? You've really built up an amazing organization, terrific network. I've done now many I.I.M.U.N events, and I think that the enthusiasm, the idealism, the incredibly impressive network that has been built up is something that I'm very proud to be associated with. I really wish you all very well at I.I.M.U.N. And it seems to me you folks have the nucleus of something that can be built up into a genuine mass movement, not just to unite nations, but to unite India to begin with, and put us all together as a country on the right path. I've often observed that it's a bit of a shame, and this is something Vedas also said, that a country with the average age of ours, which is 27 right now, should be ruled by people 2 generations removed, who make decisions for you without really getting your input. It seems to me you folks should really start asserting yourselves and let our country benefit from your youthful enthusiasm, energy, and drive.
And thank you for that. But youthful energy and enthusiasm is nothing if we don't have the council of people such as you and people such as you leading the organization in the capacity that you do. So I am very grateful once again for you spending time and talking to young viewers and young readers, because they really do look up to you, and you can see that whenever you speak and whenever you engage in any sort of colloquy at the organization. With that, I think if you want to get to know this man, I think the best book to discover him is The Essential Shashi Tharoor. So go and get your copies of Pride, Prejudice and Punditry, because quite honestly, after reading so many of his books, I think I only wish that we would probably started with this and then we would have got to those books per se. So if this is your first or second time reading him, I think this is the first book that you want to start with. And even if it is your 22nd book, you will yet find so very many things that will baffle you and pleasantly discombobulate you. I have something that make people think that I know half the dictionary that you have and you use. So thank you very much, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, for doing this, and thank you for being a part of this conversation.
Thank you, Rishabh. It's wonderful. I've been just seeing while we're talking all these comments flooding in. I'm sorry there are so many questions I couldn't get to because we had, you and I had such interesting questions to address already. But one thing that has come up repeatedly, some students of Calicut University who are protesting the fact that their 4th semester examinations have been called for Monday, just 3 weeks after they did their 3rd semester examinations. And I want them to know I raised this issue with the Chief Minister of Kerala and with the Governor of Kerala in person in both cases and in writing. But ultimately, only the government can decide. I'm afraid you guys put us in the opposition, and therefore I'm not in a position to deliver a decision for you. All I can do is articulate your interests, and that I have done. So now it's up to the government of the day to see if they can get the university to postpone your examinations. Good luck to all of you.
Well, thank you for addressing that. I'm glad that you paid attention to that one, because that's popped in a couple of times and it caught you.
A dozen times, I think, a dozen people have been asking about Calicut University. Some have said just CU, but that's what they're referring to.
So this is one of the reasons why a lot of people are rooting for you. But Dr. Shashi Tharoor, thank you very much for being the erudite and astute politician that you are, and so also a person who cares for young people. I can see that, and thank you for spending time and doing this.
Thank you. All the very best.
We'll hold you to the promise of singing.
Maybe not on Instagram, but we'll find a way. We'll talk about it. Take care. Good luck to all of you.
Bye, sir. Thank you.